Since we're all about the same height, I think we're going to call ourselves the Right Size Boys.
The Right Size Boys.
It's a new boy band. All right, that's it. All right. Well, Paul, you gave a presentation yesterday, so people are familiar with you and what Air Group Investment does. But I'm going to ask each of our two other panelists to introduce your investment groups and venture funds to the audience.
Great. So my name's Alex Favel. I represent 2 Hop Ventures. We really stand for being a trusted party in this space. We are leveraging our expert knowledge and experienced team that comes from a more traditional background to make sure that we do things properly and invest in the people that we believe that can actually enact Satoshi's vision.
And your fund, so unlike Paul, who represents a private investor, is a regulated investment fund, right? Therefore,
Correct.
Gathering investment from other people and managing it under a regulated structure.
Correct. So we're based in the Netherlands. We're regulated by the AFM. We have chosen the Netherlands because it's one of the top places in Europe to set up any kind of management fund. We only invest fiat into the BSV startups. This isolates them from what the market is doing so that they can continue to operate no matter what happens to the price. As a regulated entity, we can only touch fiat. We can't use Bitcoin to invest in startups.
Which Paul, and Calvin likes to invest using Bitcoin, right?
We do.
Yeah.
Sort of fits our message well.
Okay, great.
Is this on?
I don't know. Make sure he's on. Jackson.
Did I get hit twice? Oh, there I am.
Yes.
Okay.
Jackson, please introduce Unbounded Capital to the world.
Sure thing, Jimmy. Hi, I'm Jack Laskey. I'm a principal at Unbounded Capital. We are a venture hedge hybrid investing solely in the BSV ecosystem. And to be perfectly honest, I should not be here.
None of us now.
None of us should be here on this stage. It should be Andreessen Horowitz. It should be Union Square Ventures. But it's not. They dropped the ball, and investors have dropped the ball in this space for a long time. If you've been at this conference the last 2 days, you know what I'm talking about. And at Unbounded Capital, we don't want to let them pick the ball back up. I think, well, a lot of people have called Bitcoin SV an intelligence test, and I think there's an element of truth there. But to me, BSV is really a values test. And I spent the last week at Cambrian SV, where I think this was demonstrated to a really extreme degree. And what are those values? I think, value is the key word here. We're about building value, building things that are sustainable, and I actually don't think it's an accident that the VCs I mentioned aren't on the stage, because I don't think that's always at the forefront, to say the least. And so we are here to support the amazing businesses that are using this technology. We look forward to growing as this industry grows, and I thank you, Jimmy. I thank you, Craig. I thank you, Calvin, for the opportunity to speak here. And I thank everyone here for building this amazing industry that we are extremely happy to be a foundational part of.
It is a bold choice for both of your funds, especially since they don't have the freedom of Paul with a single private investor funder, managing other people's money to decide you will only invest in Bitcoin SV Ventures. Why did you make that choice?
So I actually joined the Bitcoin ecosystem in 2013. I was an engineer, but I got into the actual employment in this space as an analyst for a cryptocurrency hedge fund that managed over 100 different cryptocurrency assets. I was the only analyst. So it was my prime job to find out what value any of these things actually have. My conclusion was that none of them have any value at all except for what Satoshi built. So my recommendation to my employer was to effectively sell all of them and rethink their investment strategy. They did not agree. So I left and started my own fund. One of the benefits of being in Bitcoin is that you don't necessarily depend on your employer anymore if the price keeps on going up. So I was able to depart from that company and do what I believed was right. And I think the most important thing to recognize here is that people think that the diversification play is the safest play, but it's not. The safest play is knowing what you're investing in. I never invest in things that I don't understand. And it took me about a year to buy my first Bitcoin because I didn't feel comfortable knowing what it was going to do. And if you only invest in things that you understand, you mitigate a number of different barriers to the success of those startups. So that's our key investment philosophy. We only invest in people that we trust to enact what they can correctly explain.
Okay. Jack, what about you? Why did your fund make the decision? Because I know you pivoted, right? You announced a decision at some point to go strictly to only BSV Ventures.
We did pivot, and you called it a bold choice. I think it's more or less the opposite. A lot of people in Bitcoin like to talk about how long they've been in the industry. I like to brag that I've only been here since 2018. And when we got into this space, it was because we realized that other investors, just by the way they were talking about things, they couldn't possibly be approaching the problem correctly. And so we took a very sort of open-ended approach. How can we make money as investors in the crypto space? And I think if our timing had been a little different, or somehow we hadn't found Bitcoin SV, we would have just packed our bags and said, it can't be done. Other than through, perhaps scamming people, which we're not interested in doing. And so it was just a very natural evolution for us to become wholly focused on Bitcoin SV, and I think the quality of the business that's being built, the fact that Bitcoin SV itself, I think, is an extremely undervalued asset. It was just an obvious choice for us to take this direction and limit our focus to this segment of the industry, which will soon, I think, be the entire industry.
So Paul, you spend a lot of time, I know, because I confer with you a lot on this, screening investments and pitch decks from entrepreneurs across the world. We have lots of conversations about it. Give me your impressions of the ventures that are coming forth in BSV, especially the ones you heard in the first pitch day in Seoul and the ones you just heard a few days ago. What are trends you're seeing and your reaction to whether they're good, bad, or somewhere in the middle?
Sure. Yeah, definitely see a lot of companies. Given our profile with CoinGeek Ventures, we get a lot of inbound opportunities to look at. And like any venture capital or private equity investor on planet Earth, you can't invest in most things that you see. In fact, you tend to turn down 90+%. That's for good reason. Well, probably for many good reasons. But so we need to filter out a whole lot and choose what we're looking for very carefully. But to speak directly to what you were asking about, I've definitely seen a trend of companies taking advantage of the unique factors to BSV, such as, of course, the micropayments, the ability to have limitless transactions. I really like seeing things like that. If I can talk for a minute about things I don't like.
Please.
It might be a little interesting for people. Yeah. I want to be very clear because a few companies out here today may think I'm referring to them, and I'm not. So to be very clear, I'm not referring to anyone here. But there's a positive and a negative, I think, mostly positive, but there is some negative to a lot of the inbound Ethereum projects that are coming our way. It's mostly great, but there's I wouldn't call it a trend, but there's a certain frequency where companies are coming to us saying, we've now learned about BSV, we've done our homework, it looks amazing, we're going to talk to Enchain and see how we can work in the space and to others and so on. And we're happy to switch from Ethereum, but only if you invest in us.
Yes. That's the part you don't like, right? Yeah. I've gotten that too.
I actually find it very amusing because if you think about it in a way, it's a bit like they're holding their own company hostage and asking me for ransom. Because they're saying, and in fact, I've said to some, well, what if we don't invest in you? They said, oh, well, we'll be fine. We'll just continue, with Tron. or Ethereum or what have you, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that actually doesn't work, but it actually tells you a lot about the management team, right? Because that tells me you haven't done your homework about BSV or really about how to be a proper management team. And it also tells me that I don't think you're going to be a good steward of our capital and of all your other investors' capital. Because it really says you're looking for money any way you can get it. And, there's one that I said you should come to this conference. It's going to be a great conference. You're going to learn a lot about BSV. There's lots of investors around here. Don't just talk to me. Of course, we're very visible, but there's going to be panels. There's going to be lots of folks in the room, including certain people hiding in the audience right now, who are also investors you could talk to. And one of them said, well, I only come if I speak on the panels. Okay. So those are some good examples of things that sort of I tend not to like to see.
Alex, what are the kinds of criteria you use when screening investments? We've talked about some investment opportunities together. I have an idea, but share with our audience.
Yeah, so I don't like things like social media, simply because it's so difficult to predict. I don't know when you guys saw Twitter for the first time, but I was kind of dismissing it because it's 250 characters or something.
It was 240 at the time, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. So we like things that are more predictable and more obvious where the value add is, which is why we're sticking to infrastructure. At the moment, certain things don't necessarily look like infrastructure, but they will kind of start coming back into the back end of most businesses that want to use BSV as a back end for their business operations. So we also don't necessarily like exchanges, partly because there are a number of restrictions on our investment thesis, but also from regulators and banks. They don't want us to invest in these entities that have proven themselves to be a little outside of the law. So we avoid all of that kind of
Binance is not allowed to operate in Malta. Did you hear that today?
Well,
I'm shocked.
I wonder where they're going to be moving to next. That's always the question. Maybe a prison cell. We'll see. So we try and stay to the infrastructure play, and
that's important right now as this ecosystem grows. Infrastructure really key.
So we also don't invest, because we're quite a small fund. We're only 40 million euros that we're raising currently, but we don't invest in hardware because it's so capital intensive. It's so difficult to get right, and you can waste maybe $50 million on an idea that never materializes. So we take the software approach. The things we like are the more key businesses that really help people interact with the blockchain in a service way. So they don't even necessarily need to accept BSV as a form of payment, right? We're much more interested in people accepting things like credit cards to facilitate their business, because that's the way the world already works. We're looking for things that fit into existing business processes so that you don't even know you're using it, because that's where the real value is, I think.
Jack, what are kinds of projects you like and don't like and criteria you use to evaluate them?
Well, I don't want to put any, filters on what we're looking at. It's our job to determine if, there's too much risk to invest in any given business, but if you have an idea that uses Bitcoin SV creatively, it's obviously something that we'd like to hear. I will say, just as sort of a personal preference, I really like businesses that are thinking about the problems that nobody has today and everyone is going to have tomorrow. We invested in Planaria Corp, and I think that's a really great example of a business that, imagine going up to a typical VC and saying, we're going to have petabyte blocks, and someone's going to have to index those and serve them to people. That's what we do. It sounds ridiculous, but we think that's where the world is headed, and we can obviously offer financing at competitive rates because we don't see that as big of a risk as the broader market is going to. And so if that sounds like you, then I think there's probably a good fit between what you're doing and our fund.
All right, let's use the pitches the audience just heard as a lesson in constructive feedback from investors. So we've just heard 3 pitches from pitch teams. I'm going to ask each one of you to provide for one of them your reaction on what you thought they did well, as a pitch and what you think they need to improve on in order to potentially win your investment dollars. Ready? It's like a game show, right? So I'll go with Paul first. You want to take Looter?
Sure. I thought Looter was very interesting. Of course, we saw them a few days ago.
Yeah.
I'll focus on the negative because the positives I think are perhaps obvious, maybe not obvious to everyone. But I like the transactions and so on. A market that it's sort of social media, but it's also related to personal health. I think that's great. I think a thing that strikes me is that the focus initially, and it probably makes a whole lot of sense why, but the focus initially is on a rather small market. And certainly you have to start small. And so one of the things as an investor that we have to remember, I'm speaking about myself, not about the other folks, but I have to remember that this is a startup and then some. This is a very, very early stage company with one or two people. When you tend to think of the term startup outside of this sphere, it's usually even bigger than that already. So it's sort of pre-seed stage, isn't it? So on that basis, it makes complete sense to start with your home market. But I think we needed to understand better, at least I certainly did, how can this company grow and take on the world, or then Australia and then Europe and then perhaps North America. So perhaps it's on me for not asking that question in our presentation, but that's what struck me.
Okay, Jack. Feedback for Memento.
As a consumer, competition is your friend. As a business, competition is not necessarily your friend. It's somewhat unlikely to be your friend. In a space as wide open as Bitcoin SV is today, I think if you're looking to take on that degree of competition,
you mean them against Twitch, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that is what I was thinking. But, it strikes me that you want to think further and deeper. And maybe it's a VC tendency today, and people are sort of seizing on that pattern of, okay, we have Bird, let's get Lime. We're the Instagram to Twitch's Twitter. And I don't think that is necessarily the way forward. And so I would just say, I think it's a good start, and they're thinking about a lot of real problems that people have and ways to solve those, but I would just broaden the horizon and try and look for things that even in such a small space, maybe there aren't people addressing so closely.
All right, Alex, your feedback about Lynn's product, Activity SV.
So again, it's health. I think there needs to be a number of different approaches to how we use Bitcoin to deal with such sensitive information. So Lynn's approach effectively doesn't put your data on chain, which is perfectly reasonable for people today. It's also something that people expect because you don't want your health information to be publicly available to absolutely everyone. I think it's definitely fulfills a market need for the way people currently understand Bitcoin. But if we're looking to a future where everything is on chain, we need to take new approaches. I presented Pixel Wallet back in the previous Seoul, in Seoul, and one thing that people don't understand at the moment is that encryption isn't secure. It's not secure for the type of technology that we have today. And Alan Turing proved this in World War II. He single-handedly won World War II by breaking the Germans' encryption every single day. Every day. So if we're going to put data on-chain, we need to mitigate against these kind of attacks. And explaining that to people is going to be impossible, right? Because you're never going to convince everyone. So I think that Lynn's approach is the correct way for our current understanding, and it's a desperate need because people love their health, right? This coronavirus, none of us are shaking hands, or we're trying not to, but it's difficult, right? We're trying to change the way we're doing things so that we don't become infected. I don't know how many people are actually infected in China. Do you? Like, this is an impossible problem that needs to be on a single source of truth. And the way we approach that is very, very critical, and I think Activity of SV, while it's a start, it needs a lot more thought as to how we approach this kind of problem.
Let's talk about do's and don'ts in investment pitch decks. You all look at many of them. Give some advice to entrepreneurs about one good thing to do and one thing not to do. Paul?
Do's and don'ts. I'll start with a don't. I think a thing that we see a lot is when companies are talking about their total addressable market, which is a good thing to do. You know, you have a new product and you say this is the global use of such and such, and it's X number of billions, you know, per year or whatnot. I think that's definitely true, but when you're starting with your idea, you're a developer or engineer, or it's, you know, you and your partner, so there's a couple of you, you know, that total addressable market, the TAM, that's still very true, but you're not going to be, you know, approaching even your home market of that space for quite a while until you build your product. So I feel like it's a long ways off to sort of be thinking about my TAM is this, and therefore my valuation today should be X. And I think you should build your product first, and you know, get it through alpha and then beta, and then we can talk about, you know, what a reasonable valuation might be when we see there are customers or near customers using it and proving that it works and that there's the demand that you think there might be. So I don't know exactly how to answer, you know, that issue, because I do think you need to address the TAM and show us how the real world works. But you've got to realize that doesn't translate into, therefore, you know, I'm ready to take on, you know, Twitter or Google or Salesforce.com tomorrow, because you're really not, even if it's a great product.
Jack?
I think we're getting a little bit negative up here.
That's what I do.
I would say that it doesn't really make sense to try and push every business through a specific filter, because every business should be, in a lot of ways, extremely different, and every entrepreneur is very different. And I would say if you're establishing a relationship with an investor, it's better just to be yourself, because hopefully that is a very long-term relationship. And so if you present some sort of facade that isn't you, then one, I think that's hard to do in the first place convincingly, so it might not be a great strategy, but also I think you're doing yourself a big disservice. And so I would say, you know, obviously you want examples, you want guidance, but for the most part, you know your business, you know how it should be presented, and you know yourself, and I would say just follow what you think is the right way to present your own business.
Alex, any advice for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I want to reiterate what Paul said, in that effectively a lot of people are coming to the pitch days and stuff without anything other than a slide deck. And it's very difficult to justify any kind of investment in people that haven't even tested this out in the real world.
Right.
And I think one thing that people really need to communicate better is what problem they're really solving, what value that adds to the customer, and how you're going to monetize it. You may not have it all figured out, but you need to communicate that the way you're thinking about it. Yeah. One of my favorite presentations was Baymail, right? They came to Pitch Day as well. He's thinking about your inbox in a completely different way. Yeah. Inbox economics. I mean, I've never heard anything like it. It's great.
It's a great phrase, yeah.
And I think the way you communicate your idea and what value you're really adding, everyone hates spam. And it's just what vision do you have and how do you enact that? And then how do you make money from that?
Yeah. So I'll ask this question to Jack and Alex. You have I'm curious how you're finding the process of trying to solicit investors to invest in your fund and their reaction to Bitcoin SV and the Bitcoin SV ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Is it getting easier? Is it hard? Tell us, you know, some of the challenges or opportunities you're facing.
Yeah, well, and I say this extremely lovingly, but there's a lot of Alexes in the world, and I think that's a good thing. People want to see the thing working. They don't want to hear, you know, this algorithm is log whatever, you know, or order whatever. They want to see the transactions on chain. They want to see the usage. They want to know how many people are actually using this technology. And that makes it an extremely difficult sell at this point. Now, that's an opportunity, of course, And I think that's the majority of what it is, but I'm not going to tell you that it hasn't been exceptionally difficult to try and pitch this to investors. Yeah. It's hard to get the time of day, and explaining Bitcoin SV is a lesson in information security, computer science, economics, and history, recent history. And it's not an easy position to say, hey, this crypto thing that you've heard about, well, everyone is a scam except for the thing that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We've had most success in not really even talking about BSV because of exactly what you said. It's impossible to convince people that everything else is going to die except for this one thing. Right.
So what do you say?
So what do we say? We go back to what Bitcoin was originally about, helping businesses streamline their processes, make things more secure, and make things easier for them. And we only really start to bring up Bitcoin once the relationships cemented itself a bit more. And I think that everyone in this room wants to go out and advocate for Bitcoin SV, but it's such a difficult thing to do because crypto Twitter has killed Bitcoin. It's killed it. It has literally just absolutely destroyed the original idea. So we need to start talking about Bitcoin and how it fits in with existing infrastructure.
Okay.
Jimmy, one thing. We have made some strides, and I will say if you're looking to share something useful in getting this message out, you can go to ybsv.com, which actually will just redirect you to a part of unboundedcapital.com, and we've invested a significant amount of resources into trying to create content, including simple to understand videos, trying to explain how we got here. I think the content creators of the space, that is our challenge in getting this message out in a way that it's digestible and not necessarily always appealing to the people who are extremely inside of the space already.
I have to congratulate you on those videos. They're some of the best pieces of content that I've seen.
Thank you, Alex.
Check it out at ybsv.com. Bitcoin Association has also launched a few months ago a new master portal site for Bitcoin SV at bitcoinsv.com, different than our .io site, which was meant for just the node implementation and meant just for more technical information. And the new bitcoinsv.com site, which is still under further development, has more additional content now, which is designed to explain Bitcoin SV to a general audience, including business people. I think those resources will help all of you, help all of us communicate the value of Bitcoin SV to the investment community. So thank you to our panelists very much for this good conversation. All right, let's go that way.
Hi guys, I'm Johanna Bota from CoinGeek.com, and I'm here with Jack from Unbounded Capital. So tell us, Jack, what were you speaking about today, day 2 of the conference?
I was on a panel speaking about VC in the Bitcoin SV space, which is a relatively small community. I think we had all the VCs up on stage together, which was a real treat.
That's nice. So when somebody is looking to pitch you an idea in the BSV space, what do you look for? What criteria do you look for?
Well, what I said on stage is I don't want to add any filters. We are open to any creative use of BSV. And all I would say to people is know your business, come in at the right time. So not too early, definitely not too late, and be yourself.
Why did you decide to get into investing in BSV startups? Some might say that it may be a little risky. How do you feel about that?
It's a space with an unbelievable amount of potential and very, very few investors. And so if you're an investor, it's the dream. So it was a very easy decision to make it to Bitcoin SV and be investing in BSV startups.
We really look for business professionals that know what they're doing. It's quite simple. But a lot of the startups in the space at the moment are quite new and green. They don't necessarily already have a product. So we really want people that, whether they get investment from us or not, their startup will still continue. Because their startup should not depend on our investments. We have great competition in the space now, and it's great to have the options to pitch to different people.
How did you get into working with the BSV to begin with? Like, what made you decide to start looking for companies and startups to invest in within the BSV space?
So the choice of BSV was quite a simple one. When I first saw Bitcoin, I understood what it was supposed to be. The BSV vision is the same vision that I had when I first saw Bitcoin. And I started as an analyst at a cryptocurrency hedge fund during the forks because I figured out that if Bitcoin might not work, then we need to find out which one will. And my conclusion was effectively no one knows what the hell they're doing in the cryptocurrency space except for Satoshi.